Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my old pal, Evan Grant. And we're going to have Joe Hoyt on in a little bit to talk about the Cowboys and the latest iteration of fawning over the Cowboys. Maybe the most unjustified publicity in the history of entertainment. But at any rate, we're going to talk about the Rangers first. Evan, I was gone for a week, and I come back and pretty much it's the same set of circumstances, just with different players now with the Rangers. They win a little, they lose a little, they pique your interest, and then they go back to the same old thing. I think the identity of this Rangers team is that you just have to let this play out in front of you. There is no way you can say they're in or they're out. You just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, first of all, Kevin, we're not going to mention to anybody that you were in the Hamptons for a week.
Well, I wasn't there for a week. I was just there for 4 days.
Aha! So you will confirm that you were in the Hamptons and that you have a Hamptons home.
I do not have a Hamptons. So my brother-in-law, my wife's youngest brother, he has a home in the Hamptons, which is the best thing in the world, right? It's like a swimming pool. I don't want a pool. I want a friend with a pool. So I don't want a home in the Hamptons. I just want a friend with a home in the Hamptons.
Breaking: Dallas Morning News columnist just wants to freeload.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kevin, let me tell you what you missed while you were on your glorious vacation, which is a whole bunch of nothing. Mostly that reflects the Rangers offense, which decided last week to go back into its shell, and be like a little tortoise and just not come out to play very often. They did add some pitchers at the trade deadline. We talked about that last week while you weren't here with Sean. Ian Merrill Kelly and Danny Coulombe and Phil Maton, and I'm convinced that Phil Maton may be a vampire. He is completely bloodless, but man, he's been good. But listen, I think the story of this season is that this team, I think you just talked about the identity of this team. I think this team doesn't have an identity. I think that's the biggest issue. This offense either doesn't have a lot of self-awareness, or it's just not very connected, as Chris Young used the word connectivity earlier this year, which is a word that stuck with me. Just situation after situation where you'd like to think, okay, they're going to capitalize on a run scoring opportunity and they know what they need to do that, and they just seem to fritter away. That was very evident in the Philadelphia series. Against Arizona, a team with a losing record on Monday night, they did capitalize and they had their biggest comeback win of the year. And so just at a point in time where you want to say, once again, this offense doesn't work. This team does not work. The Rangers put together their biggest comeback win of the year, and maybe it does propel them. But I think at this point, most important thing for the Rangers is to stop worrying about what's going to propel them and face every game every day. They've just got to come out and win. They have no margin for error any longer.
Yeah, and at some point you had to figure that Jacob deGrom and Nathan Eovaldi would come back to earth a little bit. Eovaldi's was pitching on a historical pace here with his ERA of 1.38. How much longer could he keep that up? And then Jacob deGrom as well. It's not a question so much of them. They're both excellent pitchers. These are guys with pedigree, so we expect them to be good, but they can't be great every time out. And then when that happens and they are not as good as they have been, then it's incumbent upon the offense to do something about it. And it's just so funny, Evan. I've gotten so used to the Rangers offense now being what it is, because it was not only like this year, it's like this last year as well, that it's just weird to think back to 2023, and when they were just piling up runs left and right on people. You just knew they were going to get hits. You just took it for granted. It was an assumption about what kind of team they were going to be in the playoffs. So I don't know. Weird things can happen, and they could go on a hot streak. And we talked about that, and I've written about that, and you have as well. All you got to do is just get into the postseason and then see what happens. They have the starting pitching for that, but as you also pointed out in the series against the Phillies, uh, I think the Phillies are the best team in baseball, and I think they had the best chance of winning it all. So losing to the Phillies is not an awful thing, although losing at home to the Phillies isn't so good. But it kind of showed you who they are too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Sunday game once again demonstrated, the Rangers scored early and then they didn't score again. The Phillies had a one-run lead going to the eighth or the ninth inning. They got a runner on base. They bunted him over, and then they got him home with a sacrifice fly, and it added an important run, giving them a two-run advantage. Uh, and the Rangers had opportunities to manufacture runs, and they didn't do it. And that is the thing that I think is most frustrating for everybody around this team. That there are opportunities out there to score and to be more efficient, and the Rangers just don't seem to either know how to execute in those situations or just think that they're going to go up there and hit home runs every time, and they're not.
Yeah, that's the thing for me watching the Rangers at the plate is that they get a guy on, and there's not a thought about hitting to the right field. I mean, I realize that's an old school thinking mentality, right? And often you get a guy on first base, the number two hitter is supposed to hit behind him, right? And and maybe that is old school, but in today's baseball, but when you're not hitting at all, when you're not producing, shouldn't that be your first recourse? To me, it's like if I guess that their thinking is that well, eventually we'll come out as because this is who we are. It's like no, I don't think so, man. I mean, there's a few of these guys who have pedigrees. Obviously Corey Seager and Marcus Simeon. Those guys are legitimate hitters, but most of the rest of them are either people who are still trying to make their history or they are people who we know their history and this is who they are. And if you're not one of those kind of, if you're not Corey Seager, then maybe you ought to be thinking about, maybe I shorten up a little bit here and go to right field with this pitch. Maybe I ought to, just concentrate on just trying to meet the ball here and hit a fly ball to the outfield and not try to hit it in the second
Yeah,
inning.
but Kevin, I think it's kind of, man, it makes me sound like grumpy old guy again. But I do think it's kind of endemic throughout baseball now that guys focus on going up there and getting off their best swings. Now there are teams that still get into a rhythm and they have veteran players and they know what they need to do to tack on runs. But I think overall, if you had to paint baseball with a broad brush right now, it's guys go up there every day trying to get their best swing off in every at bat. Then they go run back into the dugout, look at their iPad to see what the swing was, how the swing looked, and they're not so worried about the situation as they are about their mechanics. And I just don't think that's effective at this point in time. Um,
Well, it seems to be working for everybody else. I'll say that. It works a lot better for everybody else than it does for the Rangers. And that's my point. Is that at some point you had to figure out who you are. We were talking just earlier about identity. Um,
well, I think a lot of that also goes to the fact that there are guys on other teams, uh, and I think this goes into our next topic as well. Is like there are guys on other teams that know their roles as on base guys, and I think the Rangers. We spent so much time talking about how they were going to slug, 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 and that was their emphasis. They don't have a ton of on base guys, and Sam Haggerty knows his role. Um, Corey Seager is an elite hitter. Wyatt Langford, I think, has gone through some sophomore year struggles, but we know he's got good comprehension of the strike zone. Evan Carter, who should be back from the IL, hopefully within the week, which would give them, if they can keep everybody healthy, would give them their expected starting lineup for the first time this year. He's a guy who gets on base and understands the importance of reaching base. And I think it shows up that when Evan plays, even when his performance isn't very good, he finds a way to contribute to the offense by either working long counts and upping the pitcher's pitch totals or getting on base via a walk. And I will just point this out, Kevin. This year, and maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe it's just timing, but when Carter starts, the Rangers are 27-17 as a team. You carry that back to 23 when he started during September and then during the postseason. They're 68-48 whenever Evan Carter is in the starting lineup, and I think it does. Well, I don't know if I want to say I think it does add a dynamic, but let's go with that as this week's theory of what could potentially help this offense. That he does add a dynamic of continuing to push pitch counts up, putting stress on pitchers to make good pitches, getting on base in other ways via slugging the ball, and that is something this team desperately needs.
Well, and then obviously when he gets on base, that makes a difference as well. Then you're talking about somebody, you're hoping to create a little havoc on the bases, and the Rangers certainly need to do that. They just need to scrape and claw for everything, and that needs to be their identity. In my mind, is
Well,
that
but
if
that's not the identity of the team they tried to construct, and so it's like they fight themselves on that, I think.
Yeah, I think they do, but it's at some point, we bought into that. I bought into it last year that this will be a team that slugs, right? And then in my annual, capitulation, where I say, all right, I screwed up. These are the things I regret writing this year. I wrote that, I thought the Rangers were going to slug, and I even got a text message from Chris Young after that saying, "Hey, don't feel so bad. I thought we were going to as well." And then I bought into it again this year because they go out and get Berger and get Jock Peterson, and what happens? Boom, nothing. Same old thing. So at some point, it seems like after almost two full seasons of this is what your offense looks like, you just have to think, well, this is what it is. Because I will say, Jock Peterson at some point, he was good last year, but he's getting close to the end of his career. To think that he was going to come in and replicate what he did last year, it wasn't outrageous to think that he could do that, but maybe he just clearly didn't. And Jake Berger, maybe we just overestimated what he had done early in his career. I remember you and I talked about this. We thought he could hit 40 home runs. He seemed like a guy on a career arc toward doing something like that. Maybe he still can do it, but he sure didn't come close this year. I noted that, as you said the other day, that the walk-off single was one of the first times this year where he's lifted a ball and pulled it.
Yeah.
It's like for a guy with that had the exit velocity that he has, how is that possible that he hasn't been able to do that this year? That just seems outrageous.
And
But
you're gonna have a hard time making a living trying to drive balls out to center field in this ballpark. So
yes, absolutely. So I think, at some point you just have to have a come to Jesus meeting with everybody, don't you? Don't you just have to say, look, guys, if expecting the same thing and then having failure, that's the definition of insanity, right? If it's the same thing over and over every day and you just expect it to change, I think that's just nuts. So I do think that Bruce Bochy has done a lot of different things and tried a lot of different lineups and put different people in the lineups, and he's done all that kind of stuff. But the approach is still basically the same. And as you mentioned, Sam Haggerty, so that's one of the few guys. But that's all Sam Haggerty can do. That's all that Josh Smith essentially can do, right?
yeah, and
And
I think that Josh Smith. When we talk about guys who don't know their identity, a lot of times Josh Smith is the guy I fall back on. Look, Josh has had a good year, but I also think Josh needs to be much peskier of a hitter and much more of a guy who you feel like he's going to do the kinds of things that Haggerty does. Josh is not going to hit 30 home runs, and I think sometimes he falls into that trap of thinking I'm a big time slugger.
yeah, he's gonna yank one here down the line, which is the only way he's gonna get one out of the park anyway. Yeah, I see the big swing on him a lot, and I don't. It's like I don't want that from him. I'd rather see him, do something where just poke the ball out in the left field if you have to a couple of times. Just don't always think about pulling a ball with a huge swing from such a little guy. Well, Evan, let's talk about the real quickly before we get out of this Rangers segment. Let's talk about the um, the schedule as it comes up now, and the Rangers fighting for that wild card spot, which is all along. This is all I thought they could do. I felt like that the Mariners after the trade deadline would have a big surge here. The Astros would fall back, and the Rangers would be competing with the Astros for the wild card spot. I think that's still a possibility, but tell us how that shapes up now, and especially with Cleveland coming up in the schedule.
Look, I said it Monday when we recorded the Rangers podcast with John Blake. And self promo plug here. Ian Kinsler was our in studio guest this week. Came down to the morning news and had a great conversation. But I said to John that after watching the Mariners a week ago, um, I feel like the Rangers' best shot may be to dominate the Astros over those 6 meetings that they have in September, and hope that as Houston continues to struggle, that it's the Astros that end up in the wild card race, and that the Mariners win the AL West, and that the Rangers can catch Houston. The other scenario here is that Cleveland's playing really well, and the Rangers have not yet played the Cleveland Guardians this season. They have 6 of, I think it's their final 35 games against the Guardians, including a homestand coming up 10 days from now. What I do look at the schedule, Kevin, I first of all, look, the schedule is one of many things that does not tilt in the Rangers' favor. I think they've got the third or fourth highest, toughest schedule remaining. That works against them. They've lost tiebreakers to the Yankees and the Mariners. So if they do end up in a dead heat with either of those teams, they're a loser. They don't play well on the road. They don't hit left-handers. So all these things kind of stack up against the Rangers. But what I will say is that, you get through the Cleveland series and you've got another nice it involves a road trip, but you've got another nice stretch where you could maybe roll off something like a 7-2 against the Angels, A's, and Arizona, and maybe that lifts you back into playoff. I don't want to say into playoff prominence, but back
Intention
more
anyway.
into the conversation, into the thick of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all falls out. But I've learned my lesson about these Rangers. I'm not writing them in, and I'm not writing them off. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that
there is
I'm
no
going to
there
wait.
is no feeling, and it's just this is how unpredictable this team is. On Monday, I went to the ballpark and I wrote a story about Wyatt Langford's power drought and speed drought, and how he hadn't hit a homer or stolen a base in a month. And then, of course, he hits a 3-run homer to ruin my sidebar and get the Rangers back into the game. I wrote a column about how this team doesn't do anything in the middle innings and doesn't get better as the game goes on. And of course, they fall down 6-1 and then rally back with a 4-run sixth inning to get back in the game. And so basically, whatever you think about the Rangers, they seem to be determined to make you think something else. I told a Rangers official on Monday that I think over the Philly series, I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't think this offense works. I didn't get a whole lot of pushback on that, uh, but I think there's that same level of feeling that you've just talked about, that we don't know what this team is ever going to be. They don't know what this team is ever going to be from day to day. I don't know if the team knows what team they're going to be from day to day, and certainly the fans don't. But I will say that I'll leave it with this: it was interesting last night, even with only 25,000 fans in the ballpark. When the Rangers did start to come back, there was some energy there. There were people chanting for Rowdy Tellez. There were people chanting for Jonah Heim when he had a big at bat. So people would like to see this team still do something. I just don't know what's going to happen over the final 6 weeks. Maybe that makes it fun. Maybe that makes it interesting. I'm out of theories.
Well, all you can really ask, right, is that the game still means something in August and September,
Yes.
and they do. And so, I guess that's the least they can give us, and they have at least done that. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're joined now by Joe Hoyt, out in lovely Oxnard. Now, Joe, you're packing up, aren't you?
Yeah, we're almost there. It's on Thursday. We're heading out. I'm going to miss this weather for sure, but I would be lying if I said I'm not excited to get back to Dallas and back into the thick of this football season coming up.
Can we get like the Cowboys people to stop talking about how nice the weather is in Oxnard? It's ridiculous.
I mean, it's right there though, Evan. I feel it coming through the open windows right now. I can have open windows, so I mean,
Open
it's
windows.
kind of hard to ignore it, frankly.
Wow, how about that?
Well, I should just mention that I went to Phoenix last week to work on a story that'll appear in the paper on Friday, and it was 117 degrees.
You
Yeah,
know,
I think I saw that Albert Breer said that he was also in Phoenix, and he's like, I can feel pain and like literal burning on my face when I walk outside. Did you
I've
have
never
that?
felt anything like it. It was unbelievable.
it's like being in a microwave oven out there. I don't know how people live there in the summer. It's just,
Gina texted me and she said, "What's that feel like?" Because she doesn't like the heat very much. I said, "Well, the only way I can describe it is it feels. I imagine it feels like what it would be like to be a piece of salmon under a broiler."
yeah. I think you're kind of like a piece of salmon under there. Well, I think of you, Evan, that's what I think of. Salmon under a
Piece of
broiler.
salmon
Under
under a
a broiler.
broiler.
Yeah, that's it. Joe, what the heck is up with this team from the standpoint of they're huge stars again. Doesn't it feel just a little ludicrous for a team that has not won anything in 30 years that they're getting I guess I can't call it the red carpet treatment. It's the blue carpet treatment. And, big premiere and everybody's making a big deal about all of it. It just feels a little silly, doesn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's funny because we were talking with Michael Irvin last night, and he's like, I don't subscribe to the idea that the '90s and the Super Bowl drought, like that stuff, hangs over this team and this franchise. And it's like, how could it not? I mean, when you have documentaries that their whole thing is about the team of the '90s, I mean, that's 30 years ago, right? And I think ironically, not only is that kind of hanging over this team, but right now, other things outside of football are hanging over the documentary as well. It's kind of this weird cycle because when you look at the Micah Parsons situation, that was a talking point last night. It was something we talked about with Emmett. He's like, why, you guys are asking me questions with Micah Parsons that have nothing to do with the actual movie, that we've come here to watch. And he's like, that's what these players are going through too. That's what these guys in the locker room are going. So it's like, how could this not be a distraction? So I think silly is kind of a good word for it. I mean, obviously, I think for all the people involved, it was kind of a cool chance to walk down memory lane. One thing Jerry said was, hey, watching this and kind of reliving it and talking about it, I realized that being a gambler is what got me to being a Super Bowl champion. He talked about the Herschel Walker trade was the best thing ever, and it gave him the ability to quote cut and shoot. So I think that there's lessons to be learned from this '90s Cowboys from the documentary that's coming out, but I also wonder if anyone's actually willing to learn them.
Hey,
Well,
I just to kind of leapfrog on that. It is funny that you bring up like the idea of the past hanging over the team. When I talked with Kinsler this week, we talked about the Yankees and when the Rangers were facing the Yankees in 2010 and the history of the Rangers not being able to beat the Yankees. He said, well, nobody would say it publicly, but we all knew it. We all thought it. It did weigh over this team. We didn't have any connection to the 90s teams, but we heard it, we knew it, and it was something that hung over the franchise. And so I think for the Cowboys to in any way like say that the last 30 years don't hang over this franchise because we ask about it, we write about it, and whether they read it directly or not, those guys are well aware of it. So it is something that it was good to hear a professional athlete like actually acknowledge that, yeah, the stuff that you guys talk about with like history and everything, we may not have connections, but we also know that, yeah, that stuff hangs over a franchise.
here's the
Yeah,
thing
especially. Oh,
that
go ahead,
worries
Kevin.
me. what I was going to say, Joe, is that when Jerry Jones says, um, "Wow, this reminds me of what a gambler I was, and how I made my fortune by gambling on these kind of things. I gambled on the Cowboys when other, although that seems silly to say that now, but back in the day when he bought the team, they couldn't find a buyer. Bum Bright was, they had people out. I remember Tom Hicks told me that his headhunter kicked the tires on it, and the quote was, which he I think he denied later, but to me was that I just couldn't make it work. It's like, how could you not make the Dallas Cowboys work? The brand of it, and Jerry saw all of that, and of course we all remember when the draft came up, and it was going to, the question of taking Johnny Manziel, and he did capitulate to Stephen Jones, who told him, "No, Dad, we don't want to do that. No one here wants to do that. You're the only one who wants him. We all want to take Zach Martin." And Jerry famously told Stephen after that, "Okay, I'll go along with this, but I want you to know I didn't get where I am today by hitting the ball right down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take gambles and do things." And I think what we have seen in history is that when Jerry gambles, ever since Jimmy Johnson left, bad things happen. And I think that I don't know that things could get much worse than they are uh, when you consider the fact they haven't really gone anywhere in the playoffs in 30 years. Um, but I don't like the idea of Jerry Jones saying, "You know what? I need to be gambling a little bit more."
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about. I think Steven and honestly Will McClay and some other people, they are now there to be the gambling insurance, I guess you could say. Like they're there to kind of cover the bets and hedge those bets because I think it's hard for Jerry to truly gamble. I mean, one thing I think he'll say is that, hey, with Brian Schottenheimer hire, that's a gamble. Well, I mean, in reality, it's a very safe hire. And I guess it's a gamble if you can kind of, that's like saying you're pin high from anywhere on the golf course, right?
Right.
So I think, that's in terms of hanging over the franchise too. I mean, Evan, I'm glad you brought that up about what Ian said because I think it's hard to ignore that this hangs over the franchise when there is a connection, when there is a constant, and it is Jerry. And I think that the gambling kind of aura is not something that honestly has really been in play in the past decade. And then you point to the salary cap too. I mean, they haven't really won since the salary cap became a thing. And how much gambling can you actually do under that lack of flexibility? I guess even though other people have found flexibility, it's a fascinating situation with as we head into another season here for sure.
I
So
mean, and also let's just say this: the Herschel Walker trade, right? I mean, in terms of gambles, this was a franchise that was going nowhere at that point in time. They had one marketable piece and they were able to sell it. I don't know how much of a gamble that is, as it's just like, taking advantage of a situation. I listened to this. I listened to Calvin when we talked last week, and I got Calvin to try and walk me through the Micah thing. And I cannot look at the Cowboys now and see a serious franchise. I don't see serious people. Nothing that they say seems to make sense. All I keep hearing is like the words of Logan Roy telling his kids, "You are not serious people." That's basically what it is. This is just it. It has just become a full-fledged circus. And I know, Kevin, you've written that a million times, but it's like there's no meat there. It's just a circus.
it is. It is a circus. So let's look at this now, Joe, and tell us at this point in training camp, since they are coming back on Thursday, and they will be out at Jerry World on Saturday, and Joe, I'll be out there as a matter of fact. So we'll see you there. Um, but tell me at this point, Joe, when you were going into training camp and the questions that you had about the team at that point. How has it developed? Have you seen answers to the questions you had? Have new questions popped up since then? Can you kind of give us just a general feel for those two areas?
Yeah, I'm laughing because the big question that I think that the Cowboys haven't been able to answer for roughly a decade now is whether they can stop the run, and that still is a question kind of heading out of camp too. I don't feel like there is a lot of confidence that they can be, a good run stuffing team, akin to what Matt Eberflus and Rod Marinelli used to have, probably the last time they were in Dallas, and what they could do there. I think that question has opened up more questions. Mozzie Smith, I don't think has been very good. Jay Toya is he's supposed to be kind of a space filler, good 7th-round pick, defensive tackle, big guy to UCLA. He was kind of getting moved a little bit. He had some good moments, but he was getting moved in the preseason game. I thought the Rams in the joint practice were even worse in terms of running all over the Cowboys. So I think that question's gotten worse. And I think the other thing too is, we walked in thinking, hey, the cornerback room is pretty thin, but hey, they'll get Savone Revel back soon, and Trayvon Diggs, September, maybe week 4, this is a guy they get back, so they can feel okay about their corner depth. It's gotten worse too. Kalen Carson got hurt. Josh Butler was also hurt. They have 4 corners that should be on this roster that could have IR or PUP designations to start the season. So I was literally doing a 53-man roster projection the other day, and I'm like, they just need bodies. So who do you even put on this team to make the 53-man roster right now? I think when you look at the defensive line in the cornerback room, there are so many questions right now that it makes you wonder, is there something else out there? Is there a potential move to be had? Is there anything you can do? I mean, is there guys out on the street that you can go pick up? I know a lot of people like to talk about Stephon Gilmore, but I think that right now, in terms of what his price might be, that might be unwilling by the Cowboys to make that happen. That might not be a gamble they're willing to take per se, on an older guy. So I think that there's a
What
lot of
happened to the
questions to
gambling?
develop.
Yeah.
Exactly. Hey, gamblers might make that move, but I don't know if right now that's in their price range. So it's I have more questions, frankly. I think the only thing that maybe got answered is what they'll probably do at running back. I think they really like Javonte Williams. Now, whether that's a sound or successful method, we'll see. I think they like him a lot, and I think that will probably be your starting running back heading into to the regular season. But I have more questions, guys, frankly.
Yeah, and I got a question too, and I know this is always a stupid thing to talk about, but when you have a quarterback who's missed as many games as Dak has over the last few seasons, Joe Milton certainly hasn't answered any questions, and letting Cooper Rush go, I didn't have a big problem with that at the time, but just because you watch Cooper Rush play and it's like, man, this is the ultimate low bar, isn't it? It's like we know how good he is physically, and this is what he's capable of doing. And so you kind of like the idea of having a backup quarterback who could eventually succeed the starting quarterback, right? And everybody knows that was not happening with Cooper Rush, but you cannot deny the productivity when he got into games. I mean, he didn't really hurt you, and he helped the Cowboys win a lot of games. I don't know that they've had a backup quarterback, my gosh, in the last, certainly not this century, who was as successful as Cooper Rush was. Now they let that go. He got a $6 million deal with the Ravens, and maybe that was just out of the Cowboys' price range. But from what we've seen of Joe Milton so far, he doesn't look like much of an upgrade over Trey Lance. He seems like the same guy, if you ask me.
I think they're similar because I think they're both projects. And I think I would tell you this: I think Joe Milton has more upside than Trey Lance. I think that the potential is incredible. I mean, you see the flips, you see the arm, but also potential is nothing if you don't get it to be consistent. And I think that's one thing where Joe Milton's struggling right now. I mean, I think that in the Cowboys' ideal scenario, Joe Milton would prove enough this preseason where they could say, all right, we're going to run with 2 quarterbacks. Maybe keep someone in the practice squad just as an emergency, right? But we're going to run with 2 quarterbacks on the roster, and we feel good, and we can trust Joe Milton that if Dak Prescott gets hurt, we're good there. And then there's some upside to that too. As of right now, Joe Milton hasn't proved that. I think that this past preseason game, was definitely a significant step back. I think Brian Schottenheimer were talking about, hey, we're trying to, me and him are trying to get on the same page. I'm trying to learn him as a play caller. He's trying to learn me as a play caller. And I still think that there's a gap there. And, I thought it was telling that Brian Schottenheimer would not name a backup quarterback yesterday. He talks about how he doesn't know Joe Milton. They're trying to find it. He called him the unknown, more than a quarterback competition. But I do think that there's trust in Will Grier, ironically. So if Milton can't prove this preseason that he could be trusted, I would not be surprised to see them keep 3 quarterbacks. And then if Dak Prescott were to get hurt, honestly, it would not be surprised me if Will Grier was the first guy they turned to.
Yeah,
Hey, Joe,
that's a safe
the
thing to
one
do.
question I had for you about camp and what you've seen is from a more casual perspective over here, like obviously Shoddy was the big move of the offseason. And what have you learned on him? What are your first takes on how this guy will be as a head coach?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because I still think we're learning it, but I think that, in terms of Brian Schottenheimer, the person, we've gotten a lot of answers. I mean, this is a guy that's truly authentic. This is someone who you can tell genuinely cares. He works his butt off. He's got a lot of inspirations. He's got a lot of he's kept notebooks over the years and just wrote little things down from a lot of different sources. So in terms of being someone who could be a quote football savant and like take in a bunch of information, he's that. Now, the question is whether he can actually apply it as a head coach and as a play caller. I think you look back at his time with the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks. There were some decent things, but largely this didn't scream future offensive guru head coach. He's kind of talked about how his time away from being a play caller, he's learned a lot of things. He watched a lot of the Sean McVays, the Kyle Shanahans to kind of get a sense of how they're kind of taking the league by storm a little bit. And I think right now we're still waiting to find out if Schottenheimer's actually been able to apply those lessons. He's kind of hardened himself. In the joint practice, he gave himself a bad grade. I don't think he would give himself a good grade in terms of play calling this past preseason game as well. He's been saying that I want to keep things vanilla and kind of keep things close to the chest. Because I can do that in year one because I have the luxury of people not knowing who I am, and I think that that's incredibly telling about everyone's perspective on Brian Schottenheimer. I don't think we know who Brian Schottenheimer, the play caller, is going to be truly. I don't think we know how successful Brian Schottenheimer, the head coach, is going to be. Incredible person, I think, authentic. I think he's doing a lot of good things in terms of motivating the players and from a culture perspective. I do think the energy's been different during training camp, and I think that's great. But we keep saying this. All that's irrelevant if you don't win. And right now, I still don't know whether or not he's going to win as a head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
See, here's the issue for me in what you just said about Brian Schottenheimer. Well, we do have a track record of him as an offensive coordinator and what he wants to do, and I think he wants to run the ball. I believe him when he says that, and I don't usually have a problem with that kind of thing. But here's the deal: if you're not going to be able to stop people running the ball, then you're going to have to start score some points. And I don't know if this team can score points or not. We'll see. But at some point, I think we need to have a little Jimmy Johnson sending somebody to the asthma field. If it's time to, one of the things that Jimmy did that was really, I think, groundbreaking for me watching coaches was that if a player just wasn't working out, he'd cut him. Jimmy cut, I think, 2 third-round draft picks in camp in different years. And of course, maybe you could do that at the time because this was before they were really good. But I thought it sent a statement to everybody. It's like, we're not carrying anybody here because that was always the thing. Like, so you bring up Mozzie Smith, right? The first round draft pick, man, you can't cut a first round draft pick. Well, I don't know. Here we are in season 3 or going into season 3 with Mozzie, and it's just still same old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that this is making any difference. And for that matter, I don't know how much better Luke Schoonmaker is either. It was like their first 2 picks from that draft. It used to be easy to criticize the Cowboys for their lousy drafts after Jimmy left. There was about a 10-year period there where it was just awful. And that is the reason why they didn't win any games. But with Will McClay in charge of the draft, they've done a much better job. But that 23 draft, when you consider the fact that DeMarvion Overshown is probably the best player from that draft, but they can't keep him on the field, man, that left a big hole, that draft.
Yeah, I think they've had a couple of drafts recently that have left big holes and they've had big misses. I also think too that, I hypothesize in my roster projection, I wonder if they could start opening potential trade talks about Jalen Tolbert, frankly, because when you look at how he's done this offseason, I think there's been a regression. I thought there was some good momentum after all the touchdown catches he had. I asked Brian Schottenheimer about him yesterday, and he said, Jalen Tolbert continues to do that. I'm going to challenge him, but he continues to do the things that people don't really see well, that he blocks well and stuff like that. Well, at a certain point as a wide receiver, you got to do some things that showcase. CeeDee Lamb has no problem with that. George Pickens has no problem with that. So I think to your point in terms of sending a message, there are some potential candidates, where they could send a message, frankly, about, competing every day, true to the only sweatshirt he's really been wearing with a mantra on it. One thing, Kevin, you said really quickly, in terms of, I do think they want to run the ball. I do, but I think that Brian Schottenheimer is going to be tempted to push the ball downfield, and I think that he's going to be tempted to try and do a little bit of the opposite and try to open up the run with the pass. I think they're when you look at their best players, it's on offense. It's CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, and Jake Ferguson in terms of skill position guys, and I think that they're going to try to utilize that.
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's what he wants to do is run the ball, throw downfield. He's not going to dink and dunk down the field. There's not going to be a lot of West Coast stuff. Not a lot of we're going to throw short passes. Hope there's after the catch, yards after the catch, and all that. Yes, I do think that they are going to try to challenge people more. And with a guy like George Pickens added, that does enable you to do that. You couldn't do it at all before they got him. Because that hasn't been CD's game so much either. Pickens does give you that capability to do that. But you're right; they're going to have to also run the ball as well. So the Cowboys have had some injuries in the running back class too. So if Javonte Williams really is going to be the lead dog at back, who's backing him up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jaden Blue and Miles Sanders are both expected to potentially play this week. There is significant progress, is the word Brian Schottenheimer said. We'll see if that actually happens. Part of me, is a little doubtful of that. But they could be on track to return by the time the season starts. Those guys are candidates. Phil Moffitt, I think, has been good in camp. I thought he showed some stuff in the preseason game. And then I think Hunter Lipke and Kevontae Turpin are the two wild cards in terms of getting carries. I wouldn't be surprised to see both get a few carries per game, frankly. I know they love Hunter Lipke. There's a reason he didn't play in the preseason opener, that he was just, in street clothes, because I think that they have a lot of confidence and trust in what he is. So those are things to keep an eye on in terms of they do believe that the offensive line is going to be the real key in terms of running the ball. And I'm still, we'll see about that, especially with Tyler Smith kind of being in and out with some tendonitis. We didn't see Tyler Booker at all in the preseason game. I thought that was a little odd. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see him a little bit more coming forward in the next two games, because I think that they need to answer whether or not they can actually run the ball.
Why did Tyler Booker not play? I mean, I don't understand that at all. First round draft pick, a guy you're trying to obviously ingratiate in your offense. So this has something that has to happen. What's the point of not playing him?
They've kind of answered it by saying that, hey, just because someone didn't play in the week 1 of preseason doesn't mean they're not going to play weeks 2 and 3. We have an overall plan in terms of snap counts for the entire preseason, not just one game. I hear that, and part of me thinks that, frankly, they've seen enough from Tyler Booker. They just don't want to risk injuries at this point on that offensive line, which is already thin. I think if you watch Tyler Booker, this is a guy that does look like he belongs. In terms of all these questions we have coming out of training camp, frankly, I don't have any questions about Tyler Booker. So I don't know how many questions they have or things they need to see. But I'll tell you this. The first time you play in an NFL stadium can't be, the season opener after the Eagles get their rings going up against Jalen Carter in terms of just like a feel standpoint. That can't happen, in my opinion. So I'm curious to see if he'll play a little bit this week.
And at left tackle, what do you project is going to happen here now?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Nate Thomas probably. That's what I'm thinking towards week 1. I'll tell you this. There is a lot of optimism about Tyler Guyton's injury, though. I think there are people that believe that he could get back a little bit quicker than initially maybe even expected. In terms of, I don't know if that's week 1 or week 2, but there's some optimism about what happened there. And I tell you this, Nate Thomas only played 10 snaps this past preseason game. That's kind of telling about what they think about him again, too, in terms of, you would think that they'd want to find out if this guy could actually play in a game and be your starting left tackle week 1 against Philadelphia. Only 10 snaps makes you think that they've got a lot of confidence either in him and they don't want to see anything else.
It seems like to me the one thing that the Cowboys, and of course, as we know, when you get down to the final cuts, there's always some movement then. There's always somebody you could find. And it does seem like that is the kind of thing you can find is a big, one technique, right? Somebody that could sit out there and maybe you could just plug into the defensive line at some point. Is there somebody like that out there, Joe?
I don't think so. I mean, because I think that is something they tried to do last year and it failed miserably. I think that they might have counted on it last year. And next, you know, a couple weeks in, you're watching Jordan Phillips get pushed 7 yards off the ball every play, and you're like, how does this happen? Well, it's because you didn't try and take care of the one thing. Trying to find interior defensive linemen for them has been a elusive task recently. And to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of confidence heading into the season that they've been able to find that answer.
You know, it seems to me that what they really always want is a guy. We got to have a guy with some quickness. We got to get a little bit of pass rush, a little penetration here. We just hate spending money on a guy who's just going to sit there and hold the line.
Yeah, and I tell you, the one guy I think who might actually have the potential to do it, but he's smaller, is Perion Winfrey, former Oklahoma guy, USFL guy, or USL guy that, you know, they just signed this offseason. He'd be smaller for sure, but I think in terms of actually playing inside, he's someone that has some ability. So I think that's one name to watch in terms of what they might do. They've also used Solomon Thomas sometimes inside. I think right now what they're going to do in the interior defensive line position is a conundrum that, you know, that they might have to throw some unique answers to try and find the right answer to.
So I think that the takeaway from all this is that Cowboy fans should probably look at game time and kickoff times at the start of the season, and then just plan to watch America's team.
Yeah. Just watch the documentary or another American team.
Yeah, watch
the documentary.
Maybe give a quarter, you know, and then, you know, if the writing's on the wall, you can go back to some other times. But you know, documentary's coming out next week, so
I mean, you're not neither one of you is painting a very rosy picture about this team.
I will say this, like, in terms of that though, like, they still have high end talent in places that matter. You know, I mean, well, Micah Parsons, we'll see, right? They still have CeeDee Lamb. You still got Dak Prescott. There still is potential. But yeah, I've felt rosier about this team before.
Yeah. Joe, I asked Calvin this last week when you were unavailable or just decided you didn't want to talk with me.
That's not true.
Give me a date on when the Micah contract officially gets done. What's your prediction date?
I kind of want to say September 3rd.
September 3rd?
I kind of want to say it's back in Philadelphia, or, you know, as they head back to Philadelphia, you know, the Pennsylvania kid signs. They not only have all the stuff about the season opener, but they got the Micah Parsons contract done. I'll tell you what, things just feel weird right now. I don't think they're close. I don't think they're talking. That's one thing they're not talking. Things just feel weird, and things have felt weird before in contract negotiations. And maybe I'm being naive, frankly, as a more younger Cowboys reporter. Things feel weird, so we'll see.
Calvin gave me August 29th. Kevin, you have a date in this? You want to? Maybe we should gamble and have a pool.
December of 26.
Whoa! So does he play or does he skip games, Kevin?
He plays without a contract. No, I don't. You know, it's just also it's so much foolishness, and that's what, you know, that kind of encapsulates the Cowboys in general. You know, the desire, and I mean, look, if I was going to make a documentary, why would I make a documentary about the Buffalo Bills or the Cincinnati Bengals or you know, the Atlanta Falcons or you know.
I would watch the Falcons documentary.
Yeah, I'm sure you would. Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a handful of franchises that have general interest, and the Cowboys are certainly the one, because people either love them or they hate them. And I will say this: the hate them is getting larger and larger in that group. I think they've got a majority vote at the moment.
I think you're at this point. I think you are oversimplifying that a little bit, because I think there's three groups. I think there's the diehards that love them. There's the people who have always hated them, and I think there's a growing number of people out there who just laugh at them, who just think they're.
Well, that counts as hate when you're laughing at people.
I think they just feel it's comic entertainment at this point, because it's unserious.
Well, it is. They are an unserious group.
I'll tell you this though: I was walking last night on Hollywood Boulevard, and then I looked down and saw like the Dolly Parton Star. And I was going to file a story, and I was just thinking, only this team, man. Only this beat, only this team. So they never keep it. They always keep us on our toes. One thing Jerry said, he's like, I told you guys when he came to the media last night, I told you guys, you hang with me, and I'll take you to the lights. And so only this team, dude.
Yeah, you're right. Only the Cowboys. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for taking the time to step in and listen with us. We'll be back next week to talk more about this, and maybe we'll have some more solid reporting on what's going on with Micah Parsons, but probably not.
We won't have any clarity
No
on Micah
clarity.
Parsons at this point next week.
No, we won't. We're already predicting that. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.